a seat. Today I've given over the opportunity to reflect on the coming 12 months. I've called it Vision Sunday, rather grand title, but it's an opportunity for us to pause and reflect and to look ahead. There's that saying which is, without vision the people perish. So it's good for us to be thinking about the future. Where are we headed? And you may recall that our vision statement is to be blessed and to be a blessing. We come, we receive, and we go in order to give. And our mission statement is to make God matter to people and to make people know that they matter to God. Our vision and our mission statements. Now, I don't know about you, but I've become increasingly despondent with the news channels. I've stopped watching the news. It's so depressing. Everything is so negative, lacking hope. Is it just me? Or, no. Yeah, you're nodding your head, so you share that sense of frustration. The meta-narrative, whether it's BBC or ITV or whatever channel you watch, is one of despair, glass half empty. And it kind of pervades and becomes our way of thinking before we realise it. Subconsciously we buy into this negativity. An example of that was in recent weeks. Rachel Gardner, who is married to Jason, who is the pioneer curate based at the Minster, was sharing a story this week of how she was cleaning up some blood that had been spilt on the steps of the Minster. You may have read about this. There was a tragic stabbing on the steps of Preston Minster. I don't think anybody lost their lives, thank goodness. But obviously there will be scars physically and mentally and emotionally. But the blood lay there on the floor and nobody bothered to clear it up. And so Rachel and Jason got on their hands and knees and started scrubbing. And a passerby stopped and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm clearing up the blood." She said, "Oh, you don't want to do that. It's pointless. As soon as it's gone, it'll be there again." So Rachel said, "Well, if it is, I'll clear it up again." There's that pervasive negativity within our culture of settling for mediocrity, second best. And before we know it, we can buy into that feeling. In recent days, I've been reading this book by C.S. Lewis, who is the author of the Narnia series, but he was also a great thinker based at Oxford University during the war years. And this book is called Mere Christianity. Some of you may have read it. It's a collection of radio talks, if you like, that C.S. Lewis gave between the years 1941 and 1944. And I guess the reason for the talks was to really boost morale and offer hope to the people. It's an apologetic, an explanation, a defence of the Christian faith. It's well worth a read. And for the whole part, pretty much, C.S. Lewis is addressing the question, is Christianity true? I might be generalising a bit there, but in a nutshell, is Christianity true? And I sense that for today, people aren't actually asking that question, is Christianity true? They're asking a different question. They're asking this one, does it work? We live in a consumer society. So the question, does it work? What's in it for me? Is the question I think people are asking today. People are open to exploring Christianity, but they want to know, does it work? And our message is, yes, it does work. And we're to tell our stories. Each one of us has a story to tell, different from the other, unique. People love telling stories. Jesus was a great storyteller. It engaged people. We can all tell our stories. In our gospel reading this morning from Matthew, we're challenged by those words of Jesus to transform our way of thinking, renouncing the ways of the world and embracing the ways of God. An incredibly countercultural thing to do. To go not the way of the world, but to go God's ways. And the temptation, as I say, for us is to be hopeless, to give in. Well, what's the point? What's the point? And we restrict our imagining as to what could be. And we pigeonhole God and what he's capable of. And yet God has said, through his Son, that his kingdom will be built. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, was urging us as Christians to model our lives on a new way of thinking, transforming our minds. And in transforming our minds, our outlook then changes. Because then we know what the will of God is, and what his will is for us in our own lives and for the church here at St. George's. So, my first point of two today is this. We're to imitate Christ and be people of hope. We're to imitate Christ and be people of hope. The second point that I want to make is this. We're to offer our lives and be people of hospitality. As I said, we live in an increasingly me-centred world. Individual rights trump collective responsibility. And we're seeing a bit of this played out, aren't we, in the media at the moment with this whole notion of the woke culture. You can't say anything without fear of offending somebody somewhere, because it offends me and my feelings. And you may remember that L'Oreal advert from a few years back, which buys into this whole consumerist mindset. Because you're worth it. Do you remember that one? Because you're worth it. In contrast to all of that, you've got that great saint whose feast day we celebrated on the 14th of August, Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe was a Roman Catholic priest who found himself incarcerated in Auschwitz. There was an escape, and the Germans weren't too pleased about it and responded by sending 10 people to their deaths through starvation. 10 people picked randomly as punishment for the escape. One of those people was a married man who had a family, young children. Maximilian Kolbe knew this. And he said to the German guards, "Take me and not that man. He has a young family. I'll go in his place." And so he did. And it led to his martyrdom. In those final days, Maximilian Kolbe was able to minister to the 9 other people incarcerated. Made a saint in recent years because he gave of himself. There's a message there for us as a church. We're to be for the other. We're to exist for those not yet our members. The call in the Gospels is for us to feed the hungry and welcome the stranger. In our Gospel reading, Jesus says, "Take up your cross and follow me." Our service of others may come at a personal cost. It might even lead to suffering. But Jesus promises to reward us, to be with us, and knowing that gives us hope to persevere. as a church to offer up our lives, to take up our cross, to follow Jesus. Well, like Colby, Jesus' life was marked by sacrifice and service. He came and gave himself. He didn't hold back. He gave of himself fully in the incarnation. He gave of himself fully in the crucifixion. Jesus' life was one of humility. It was one of hospitality. He sought out those who were on the margins. He spent time with those society had rejected. Paul, again in his letter to the Romans that we heard read just a moment ago, urges us that we're to live lives worthy of our calling as Christians, offering our bodies as a holy sacrifice, truly pleasing to God. And we do that by being people of hope and by being people of hospitality. Quote from a book I read a number of years ago now says this: "We're called to open ourselves, to imaginatively transform our lives in such a way that evil diminishes and good prevails. It's what Christ asks of us in taking on our humanity, sanctifying our flesh, and asking us in turn to reveal God to another." The title of that book was Exclusion and Embrace. I often consider this question. I may have posed it before, forgive me if I have, but I think it's a really pointed question for us to reflect on. And it's this: if we were to close tomorrow, would people in Preston even notice? That's a really pointed question. Would we be missed? What are we known for here at St. George's? Is it for being a place of hope and hospitality? And when people visit, and we should be expectant of that, we don't want them to feel like they've gate-crashed a private party, so we all turn round and stare at them and say, "What are you doing here?" It's happened to me before in churches. It feels incredibly uncomfortable. A book I've been busy reading this summer, as you can tell, Know What You're For, by this American called Jeff Henderson. And he says this: instead of trying to convince customers to become fans of the business, well, we can use that word business for church, thriving businesses of the future will become fans of their customers, because endearing actions create enduring companies. What are we known for here at St. George's? I hope we're known as a church that is for the other. Be blessed. Be a blessing. Really want to encourage you this autumn to go deeper with God. There'll be the opportunity to do that through a couple of things which I'll refer to on the notice sheets at the end of Mass: the Start course and the reading group. I'll say more about that later. But I want to finish again with a quote from the foreword to Mere Christianity. The Christianity that Lewis espouses is humane, but not easy. It asks us to recognise that the great religious struggle is not fought on a spectacular battleground, but within the ordinary human heart. When every morning we awake and feel the pressures of the day crowding in on us, and we must decide what sort of immortals we wish to be. Imitate Christ. Be people of hope. Offer our lives. Be people of hospitality. Let me close with a prayer from St. Ignatius Loyola. Teach us, good Lord, to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labour and to ask for no reward, save that of knowing that we do your will. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.